In 1962, the highest-ranking generals in the United States military drafted a formal plan to launch a campaign of terrorism against their own citizens. The proposal involved shooting people on the streets of Washington, D.C. and Miami, detonating bombs in New York, and hijacking passenger planes, all to be blamed on a foreign enemy. These plans were recorded in a formal government document, approved by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and marked top secret. It was called Operation Northwoods. To understand how the military reached this point, we have to look at the geopolitical panic of 1962. Fidel Castro had recently transformed Cuba into a communist state, bringing a Soviet ally within 90 miles of the Florida coast. The CIA's attempt to topple Castro at the Bay of Pigs ended in a catastrophic defeat. The failure left the United States humiliated on the world stage and the military leadership increasingly desperate. The Joint Chiefs believed that if Castro remained in power, communism would spread throughout Latin America. They wanted a full-scale invasion, but they lacked a provocation that would convince the American public to support it. On March 13, 1962, General Lyman Lemnitzer delivered a memorandum to the Secretary of Defense titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba. The first level of the playbook was staged theater. The military proposed dressing American soldiers in Cuban uniforms to attack the base at Guantanamo Bay, blowing up ammunition and sinking a ship in the harbor to manufacture a Cuban assault. The plans quickly moved toward human collateral. One proposal involved sinking boats of real Cuban refugees fleeing to the United States, allowing them to drown on the high seas to manipulate public sympathy. They even considered exploiting the space race. If John Glenn's upcoming orbital mission ended in a fatal accident, the document suggested the U.S. could release fabricated evidence blaming Cuban sabotage. These proposals suggest a command structure that viewed its own citizens and national heroes as tools for foreign policy, regardless of the terrible cost in human lives. The playbook's most violent level involved direct attacks on American soil. The generals proposed detonating live explosives in cities like Miami to intentionally wound or kill civilians. After the blasts, operatives would plant forged documents and Cuban equipment at the scenes to ensure the blame fell directly on Castro's regime. The violence was intended to reach the heart of the capital, manufacturing a state of total national panic through a series of well-coordinated bombings. The Joint Chiefs believed these attacks would create the necessary domestic pressure to force a declaration of war. The most elaborate logistical deception in the document was known as the Phantom Flight. The plan involved a civilian passenger aircraft being swapped mid-air with an identical unmanned drone. While the real plane was diverted to a secret base, the remote-controlled drone would be flown into Cuban airspace and destroyed, making it appear as if it was shot down. The CIA would prepare fake passenger lists full of non-existent college students to ensure the press reported a tragedy that would spark maximum emotional outrage. This plan aimed to engineer a flawless, verifiable tragedy, using the public's grief to justify a military response. President John F. Kennedy rejected the proposal entirely. The operation was immediately halted. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara later described the military leadership behind the plan as having lost touch with reality. General Lemnitzer was quietly reassigned, and the document was buried in a classified vault. The only barrier between the American public and a military-staged terror campaign was a single civilian executive saying no. The document remained hidden for 35 years until a transparency law forced its declassification in 1997. While investigative journalists and major news outlets reported the findings, the story struggled to remain in the public consciousness, briefly appearing in news cycles before fading back into the archives. 2 years after the Northwoods proposal was rejected, reported attacks on U.S. Navy ships, later proven to be non-existent, provided the exact provocation used to justify a massive escalation in Vietnam. If a plot of this magnitude was meticulously planned in 1962 and hidden until 1997, it raises the question, what else has been planned that the public still doesn't know about?